6, and we have hit what is undoubtedly the signature story. I mean, if you knew nothing else about the book of Daniel prior to this series that we began 5 weeks ago, you at least probably said to yourself at some point, I think there's a story in there somewhere about a den of lions and Daniel and all of that. And so here we are in this story. But I have to tell you, more than just the signature story of Daniel, I need you to know that Daniel is one of the most inspirational characters of my whole life. I look at Daniel's life and I say, God, help me to be like that. Inspire me to live that way for you. In fact, the word that keeps coming up again and again, repeatedly in this passage, is the word faithfully. Say that word with me. Faithfully. This is descriptive of Daniel's life. Here's the thing about faithfulness. We tend to look back on faithfulness with a lens that looks from the current to the past. For example, if you go to someone's 50th anniversary celebration, and you're sitting there and enjoying that celebration, someone's going to say, you know what, it's so wonderful to look back from today into the past and see that they've been faithful down through the years. We do that at funerals, don't we? This week I had to attend a funeral of two men who were very young, two brothers who both died in a terrible drowning incident. And as I was at that funeral and praying for that family and thinking about the legacy that we leave in life, I just got to thinking about how I want my legacy to be a legacy of faithfulness. In fact, another thing I got to thinking about was I've decided I think I want to preach my own funeral. I really do. We've got into the video thing now. The camera's working, and so one of these days I'm going to bring something out. I'm just going to record my funeral sermon because, if I live to a good old age, who knows who my wife will pick? She might be senile by then. Who knows who she might pick to preach my funeral sermon? So I told my son Clay, I said, Clay, you know what? I'm just going to preach my own funeral sermon. He said, well, Dad, if you do that, you got to put some jokes in there. And I said, well, of course I would. I've never preached a sermon without something funny in it. And so Clay and I agreed that I really need to begin to dig and mine and search for the world's greatest mother-in-law jokes so that I can put them into my funeral sermon. And you're like, well, why? She won't be there. Of course she will. That woman right there is going to outlive me. She's going to be at I don't know how old that's going to make her. She's old now and she's still going. So, she's going to... And so Clay nailed on the head. And then Clay said, Dad, you know what the hardest part's going to be? I said, what? He said, the hardest part's going to be when you got these great mother-in-law jokes, you're going to be so tempted to use them now, but you got to save them for your funeral sermon. So anyhow, all that, so I thought I'd share that tidbit with you. But let me tell you one thing I would love to know happened at my funeral. If someone gets up to eulogize me, you know what that word means, right? It's a person who gets up and talks about someone's life. If someone gets up to eulogize me and says, you know what? This I can tell you about Todd. He was faithful just like Daniel. Mission accomplished. I'm good with whatever else happens at my funeral, sweetheart. If the words are said and are true of me, that I have been faithful, mission accomplished. Now, here's the thing about faithfulness. We observe it by looking back through time. But we can only live it today. I want you to think about that for a minute. We observe faithfulness by looking back through a pattern of time, but you can only live faithfulness today. You can't live faithfulness tomorrow. You're not there. And we never live in tomorrow. We only live in today. And the amazing thing about Daniel is this. Daniel is faithful to God an entire lifetime by living for God one day at a time. He just says, I'm going to be faithful today. In fact, this story that we read about Daniel in the lion's den, it's really what I call a bookend story. The first 6 chapters of Daniel tell us varying stories about Daniel's life. The second 6 chapters talk about prophecy and end times. We're going to sum all those 6 chapters up in the final sermon next week. We'll do all that stuff on prophecy and end times and anticipation of Jesus coming and all that. So if that stuff excites you, I don't preach that very often, but next week's your weekend. Don't miss it right here. But chapter 6 is the outside bookend. It's the end of life bookend for Daniel that traces all the way back to the front end, which was chapter 1. And just to remind you real quick, chapter 1 is when Daniel, as a young man, he and his peeps are taken to Babylon. And at a very young age, he decides one of the ways he's going to honor God today is by staying true to what has been the restrictive diet of his law. He passes up on all of the things that are there to obey God in that way. And then that very first part in that first chapter, talking about him as a young man, sums it up in verse 21. It says this, and Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. Now, that's not the kind of verse we put on the screen. Everybody starts shouting amen. No one's, oh, that's a great verse. I'm going to cross-stitch that onto a pillow, right? No one looks at that verse and says, that's a great verse. But I'm going to tell you something. That is a great verse. Because let me show you what that verse is saying. Let's do it with a little chart, if we could, Dave. It goes like this. Daniel went into captivity in 605 BC. We have that historic record. We can track that back and prove that by various sources. It's 605 BC. How old was he in 605? You see it? Say it with me. He was 16 years old. We approximate he was 16 years old in 605. Then that verse comes up. He remains there until the first year of King Cyrus. So the beginning of Cyrus, or of Darius, okay, who was the actual ruler in the city there, is 539 BC. I saved you the trouble of math because it's early in the morning, all right? And so the difference between 539 and 605 is how many years? 66 years. So bookend number 1, the beginning of Daniel's life, right, or his beginning of his life as recorded in this story at 16 years old is right here. The other bookend, chapter 6, Daniel is how old? How old? 82 years old. I don't know what you picture about that guy that went down into the lion's den. Here's my favorite painting of Daniel in the den of lions. And you will see in this painting what I think is a great rendering of more legitimately how old Daniel was. And so here we have Daniel, 16 years old, just living in integrity, saying, you know what, God, today I'm going to live for you. And then at 82 years old, thrown into a den of lions. You know what Daniel's saying? You know what, God? Today, no matter what happens, I'm going to live for you. Let me give you the backstory about what's going on here. Darius, when he came into power, said, I'm going to get managers, governors, if you will. And I'm going to divide up all the area of the land because they had a huge kingdom. I mean, the Persians and the Medes had already conquered huge portions of the world, and now they had all of Babylon as well. And so they've got to govern it somehow. So they divided up into 120 governorships, and then they put 3 supervisors over top of those governors. And Daniel so excels that he says, you know what? We're going to put Daniel as the head of those 3. So Daniel's about to become the most important person in the kingdom besides Darius. And so let's see what the other guys thought of that. You heard it, but let's just look at it real quick. It says, then the other administrators and high officers began searching for some fault in the way Daniel was handling governmental affairs, but they couldn't find anything to criticize or condemn. He was faithful, always responsible, completely trustworthy. So they concluded, our only chance of finding grounds for accusing Daniel will be in connection with the rules of his religion. Here's what they did. They went on to Daniel's Facebook page and looked at all of his posts. They got a hold of his phone and checked all of his text messages. They used some kind of worm, and they got in, and they read all of his emails. They downloaded his QuickBooks and checked how he was doing accounting for the king. They didn't just take a peek, folks. They scoured Daniel's life. They looked through it from top to bottom with a fine-tooth comb. They went through it, and this is what they said. You know what? This guy's legit. This guy's honorable. This guy's honest. We can't find anything about him that we can say negatively about him except this, This guy loves God too much. Anybody here want that to be the testimony someone will say of you? Are you wondering now why I want someone to say at my funeral I'm like Daniel? Man, I want someone's testimony about my life to be. Todd's biggest problem was he just loved Jesus too much. Other than that, everything else about him, we can't find anything to complain about. Can I ask you a question? When people move from watching your life at a distance to looking at your life closely, do they end up delighted or disappointed? Are you like Daniel? You're like, I mean, who could really be like Daniel, Pastor Todd? Come on, I mean, isn't he an anomaly? Isn't he just kind of strange? Isn't it odd that someone could really serve God that well? Isn't he just weird? But I guess the question I asked this morning is, if we serve a righteous God and we call ourselves Christians, then shouldn't it be weird if we're not living that way? Shouldn't faithfulness actually be what is said of us as children of God? Shouldn't there be people who look at your life and say, that person just looks more and more like Jesus every time I look closer? She's just becoming more and more the evidence of the work of God in her life. But then you say, well, Pastor Todd, that's not fair. How can you compare me to Daniel? I mean, look how good Daniel had it. I mean, of course Daniel's going to honor God. Look how good to Daniel God was. And we mistakenly get this idea that somehow Daniel had this easy road, which, by the way, if you tell yourself that it was easy for Daniel to be faithful to God, you've either been on summer vacation for the last 5 weeks or you just weren't listening when we were preaching. Because we told you that in Daniel's life, the circumstances of his life go up and down and up and down. Do you remember any of them? No one wants to raise their hand, do they? So if you've been tracking with this series at all, or as we go back and I remind you of these things, you'll remember. But let me just show you how the circumstances of Daniel's life just plunged and peaked. It's wild. Remember, it starts with the kidnapping. We just talked about that. He's kidnapped and brought into Babylon. Anybody think that would be a bad day? Anybody think if you need an excuse to abandon God, Daniel could have given one? And said, God, where are you? This is a low day. But then he's there, and as we mentioned just a moment ago, he honors God as a young man through his choice to continue to follow his Jewish ways. And so at the end of that, the king tests them, and he finds out these guys are better than any of the other local guys I've got. So he raises them up to a very high place, and all of a sudden, Daniel goes from way down here to way up here. It's like, wow, life's good. God, I'm serving you today when life is good. What happens next? In the next chapter, if you remember the story, King Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, and he makes his magicians and enchanters come in. He tells them, you have to tell me what the dream was, and they can't do it. And so Nebuchadnezzar gets mad. He says, kill all my wise men. And they go to Daniel, and they say, I'm sorry, Daniel, come on out. We're going to kill you. Daniel's like, what's up? They're like, occupational hazard. Can I ask you a question real quick? I mean, any of you on your job, your boss ever says, I'm going to kill you? Except it's literal. Is that a bad day? I think that's a bad day. You punch in, and they're like, first thing on the docket today is we're going to cut your head off, you know? That's a bad day. But then they plead for time, and God gives Daniel the meaning of the dream. And so Daniel goes and tells the dream to Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar says, Daniel, you're the best. I'm rising you up to the top. And then it's a good day, isn't it? Right? And then we have the fiery furnace. Right? And they're being bound up, and they're being thrown in the furnace. If later this afternoon anybody binds you up and starts taking you down, and they're going to throw you into a furnace, you will say, this is a bad day. But God rescues them. Remember, I preached that sermon. I didn't even tell you the end of the story. I said, you go home and read it yourself. I love the end of that story, because when the king looks into the fire, there's not just Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in there, but Jesus is in there with them. And all of a sudden, the worst day of their life becomes the best day of their life, because they're hanging out in the fire with Jesus. Are you catching the pattern yet? And Belshazzar comes along, and Nebuchadnezzar has died, and Belshazzar doesn't care about Daniel and just kind of sets him aside. And Daniel says, well, I guess that's That's it for my days of leadership. And so he's just down here. He's just been forgotten. He's just a nobody now to Belshazzar. But then Darius takes over and rises Daniel all the way to the top. But now Daniel's going to be thrown in a den of lions. Folks, did you follow the chart? Here's the thing. This is the chart of the circumstances of Daniel's life, but this is the chart of Daniel's faithfulness. He says, God, today's a bad day. I think I'll serve you. He says, God, today is a great day. I think I'll serve you. God, I don't know what tomorrow's going to bring, but today I'm going to serve you. God, yesterday wasn't very fun, but today I'm going to serve you. Oh, that there would be an integrity in our lives that would genuinely serve God no matter what is going on. You see, some of you might think to yourselves, you know, if God would have just, maybe got a friend, you say, you know what, they were serving God when things were good, but when things got tough, they ran off. Why'd God do that to them? Why didn't he just make things easier or better for them? Then they would have kept serving him. But let me tell you something. Difficult circumstances in life don't create who you are. They just reveal who you are. You understand what I'm saying? I say it again. When we face difficulties in life, they don't create what we are. They reveal what we are. When we were just getting in the process of preparing to build this building, out here, this property, it wasn't a parking lot at that time. It was just grass and dirt and gravel. There was an old shed that sat just right about outside these windows right there. And one of our first work days, all these men and women came together, and we're out just doing all kinds of stuff, trying to get this prepped for us to begin the building. And there was this old shed that needed cleared out. And they needed all the stuff out of it so they could move it. And so I said, you know what, I can do that. So I volunteered for that. So I went over and pulled the door open and kind of looked around a bit and to see if any other creatures wanted to leave before I entered. And so then I walked into the shed. And so I'm looking around at what I'm going to do. There's not a real lot of light in there, but I could see, surprisingly, the whole floor is intact because it's an old wood floor. It looks pretty good. So I just start kind of walking along the floor. I get about 2/3 of the way back in the shed, and as I'm walking along, I stepped. And I mean, I'm kind of a big guy. I put all 146 pounds, of weight, down on that foot. And when I did, my leg just crashed right through the floorboards of that shed. And when it did, the way it splintered off, the part in front of my leg actually pierced up right into my leg. I've still got the scar here to prove it. I really took one for the team that day. And my leg now was actually, if you could picture the floor of the shed, my foot's under the shed dangling like this, right? Well, when I went to try to pull back out, it was literally pinned by the ankles of the board. And the only thing I could do with my one leg through and my other one here was just start to try to put pressure on the back leg and put enough pressure on so that this board began to crack and to bow, and then I could pull my leg out. We were 5 minutes into our first work day, and I'm just bleeding like mad. So I was like, I can't wimp out right now. And so I limped all the way upstairs and just sat there kind of semi-nauseous, and everybody went by. We're like, you okay? And I lied and said yes. But here's the thing. As I walked across that floor, it looked like it was fine. But when the pressure of my weight was put on that floor, what happened? Did I make that board to lack integrity? No, that was just revealed by the pressure of my weight. If you are faithful to God, if there is integrity in your life, if you genuinely love him, when times get difficult, it'll just reveal who you are. You'll say, bad day, but I'm just serving God today. I'm not quitting. I'm going to be faithful. I love how Daniel responded to that. Look what it says in verse 10. When Daniel learned that the law had been signed, in other words, when Daniel realizes, I'm going to the lion's den, he went home and knelt down as usual in the upstairs room, and with its windows open towards Jerusalem, he prayed 3 times a day, just as he had always done, giving thanks to his God. Then the officials went together to Daniel's house and found him praying and asking for God's help. Man, I love that term, as usual. You know what that means? It means Daniel understood that the root of faithfulness was daily being in contact with God. The root of faithfulness is just day in and day out being in touch with his word, talking to God. You say, I want to be faithful to God. Well, daily, as usual, spend time with God. And what I really like about this is Daniel says, you know what? I've been serving God for 65 years here in Babylon. You think I'm going to change today because someone wrote a law? I've been honoring God my whole life. I've seen him take me through everything imaginable, every risk, every jeopardy. He's blessed every single time. Do you think because some kind of crafty enemy of mine has laid a trap that I'm going to give up on God now? Do you think I'm going to come home and say, you know what? I've been praying for the last 65 years, but today I'm not because I'm afraid of a law or I'm afraid of a lion. You know what Daniel says? You know what? I've been serving God and he's never let me down yet, and nothing's going to change today. I'm just going to keep on being faithful. So you know what Daniel says? Daniel says, I'm not doing no migraine prayer. You know what migraine prayer is? It's for people who are embarrassed that they're praying when they're praying with other people around, so you do one of these. Oh, yeah, God, thanks for my food today. Yeah, you know. It's not to do no migraine prayer. I'm throwing my windows open because that's what I do. And it's towards Jerusalem in accordance with 1 Chronicles. And I'm just going to call on God because he sees struggles as an opportunity simply to live for God today. You know, the king refers to Daniel twice in this passage as faithful. The irony of it all is Daniel's faithfulness has led to his promotion, and this promotion is what's got him in trouble. I want you to know, when you honor God, sometimes in the midst of honoring God, it'll make the situation worse. On the face of it, it'll look worse. But God's there in the midst of it. So here's Daniel. I'm going to live for God today. And so he says to himself, well, likely this is going to lead to the worst night of my life. And he may say it's going to lead to the shortest night of my life, right? I'm going to serve God today. And this is going to be difficult. It's going to be a bad night. But you know what the amazing and ironic thing about this passage is? The king ended up having a worse night than Daniel did. The Bible says the king didn't take any food, didn't take any entertainment, laid in bed, tossed and turned, couldn't sleep, spent the night worrying. I don't know what kind of image you have of what happens to Daniel in the den of lions. By the way, we only know one fact about what happened to Daniel in the den of lions. We don't know if the lions roared all night. We don't know if they walked around like pussycats. We don't know if Daniel got to sit around and pet him or if they snarled at him. We don't know. There's only one thing we know. It was in the scripture passage. You know what it was? That God sent an angel who closed the mouths of the lions. All right? Get that? Daniel says, I got a feeling this is going to be one of the worst nights of my life. And you know what Daniel spent the night doing? Sitting in a dungeon with an angel. That's kind of cool. Darius had a worse night than he did. But who would have known? Who could have even guessed it? And so in the morning, Daniel's rescued. He gets pulled out. And it led me to ask a question, and with this, we'll head to the conclusion of this. I've never thought about this before until I was preparing. How come Daniel gets pulled out of the lion's den? I mean, if this is capital punishment, right? If this is execution, then why didn't they just move the stone a little bit, look in and go, what? He's not dead yet? And push the stone closed again. I mean, if it's execution, it's execution. We'll leave him another day. We'll leave him another week. We'll wait till the lions get really hungry. We don't know what's going on, but eventually they'll eat him. Right? Why did they let him out? The answer to that question is that in the culture of that day, what this law wrote into it was not execution for anybody who disobeyed, but rather something called ordeal. The difference between execution and ordeal is this. Ordeal has built into it this idea. It's really, 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 really likely you're going to die by what we're going to subject you to. But if perchance you don't, then we declare you innocent. We put you through the ordeal. We throw you into the den of lions. And if somehow in the morning you're still alive, then we proclaim you innocent. You say, how do you know this is ordeal? Well, for two reasons. One, in the morning, they let him out. But the second is this. Look at what Daniel says to the king. The king comes running and says, Daniel, you've served your God faithfully. Has he rescued you? And verse 22 says this, I have been found, what's the word? Say it with me. Innocent in his sight. Get this. Daniel says, O king, I can serve you faithfully because I serve God faithfully. And my innocence, the word innocent here doesn't mean that Daniel says, I've never sinned, I'm perfect, I never have a bad thought, I've never said a single thing I shouldn't say. That's not what he means by innocent. What he means by innocent is when my life was put to the test and when I was put to the trial and to the ordeal, God declared I was faithful. And I am faithful to him, and God has declared me innocent. And so, King, I can serve God that way, so you can trust me to serve you. Where do you get that kind of faithfulness that can face the ordeal? How do you have that kind of life that says, okay, God, no matter what today looks like, I'm not quitting out on you? Well, I've come to believe that the key is you just become so enamored with God, so sold on him, that you begin to say to yourself, what can ever compare? Look, at risk of repetition of illustration, but in this day and age, with the kind of damage that goes on to marriages all the time, it's worth repeating. If you want to say, Pastor Todd, give us one secret this morning that would help affair-proof our marriage, what might it be? Well, one of those secrets would be this. Become so enamored with that person that you are married to. Be so in love and so captured by them that any other temptation would look to you like the worst deal in the world. You see what I'm saying? Folks, that's how I live my life. I mean, I am so enraptured and so captured by my wife that there's no way I'm trading her for something else. There's no way someone's coming along and going, well, Pastor Todd, you could have this, or you could do that, or you could run off to this, or off to that. I would say, are you kidding me? How stupid do you think I am? And don't answer that question. Why would I do that? And here's the thing, when we talk about being faithful to God, has he ever grabbed a hold of your heart in such a way that when you look at the things of this world, you say, are you kidding me? They went to Daniel and said, Daniel, you got to stop praying, because if you don't, we're going to throw you to the den of lions. And if you do stop praying, you can keep your job. And Daniel says, are you kidding me? You really think I would give up God to keep this job? Do you really think I would compromise my integrity to keep myself safe from having to go into the den of lions? You seriously underestimate how sold out on God I am. In the New Testament, Jesus said it this way: the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field. And when a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy he went. And he sold all he had and bought that field. You know what word I love in that passage? It's in the second lineup. It's the word joy. And then in joy, he went and sold all he had and bought that field. You know what? This man didn't go, well, I suppose I should go buy that field. This guy went skipping to the real estate office. This guy said, listen, I'll sell everything I got. I'll mortgage everything, the whole farm. Just give me that field. And Jesus says that's what the kingdom of heaven is like. And when God captures your heart, you become the kind of person like Daniel who says, I've got God. What would I trade that for? We don't go, well, there's God, but then there's the world. And Lord, you got some good stuff for me, but boy, there's this stuff other people do. Are you kidding me? How would I dare think that way? I've got God. Pastor Todd, sometimes when we serve God, life can become threatening. What can someone do to you when you're enamored by God? What can they really do to you? Paul said, you kill me? Fine, I'll go be with Jesus. Thank you very much. What are you going to do? Unbelievers going to make your life difficult? What are they going to do? Unfriend you? Right? They're going to send you a mean email? They're going to stop texting you? What do you do then? Well, I'll just draw in closer to the family of God and make them my support and my help. If I serve God, difficult times will come my way. That's all right. When hard times come, they just drive us that much closer to God, and we sense His mercy and His grace that much stronger in our lives. We just become so enamored by God that we say, oh, God, I want to be faithful to you to the very end. And we don't sit there and go, well, maybe God, maybe this. Because listen to me, how could I ever do that with Jesus? He didn't do that with me. As we celebrate in communion this morning, you know what we're remembering? That Jesus looked at you and at me and said, I'll sell the whole farm for them. I'll willingly give my life for them. This is how faithfully God has loved us. And He gives us the opportunity to be faithful in return. I want us to bow our heads together as we prepare to take communion this morning.